He erased his pregnant wife to protect his fortune. His daughter helped him do it. 5 years later, she appeared at the wedding holding a child he never knew existed. And when he saw her standing in the doorway, his legs gave out beneath him. That's when he learned you can't bury the truth forever. My beautiful family, may the Lord who sees every hidden thing shield your homes from betrayal, wrap every wounded heart in healing, and give every woman reading this the strength to rise when they try to bury her alive. May no child ever be used as a weapon. May no man's greed blind him to grace, and may every secret sin find its reckoning in the light. If this story touches the part of you that knows justice still breathes, drop a like, share, comment, amen, or tag someone who needs to remember. What was meant to destroy you can become the very thing that crowns you. Some betrayals don't announce themselves with screaming or violence. They arrive in whispers, in decisions made behind closed doors, in agreements between people who should protect you. Debbie Stumpf learned this on an ordinary Tuesday morning in spring, 5 years before everything came crashing down. She stood in the marble kitchen of the Shearer estate, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked manicured gardens worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Her hands rested on her growing belly, 4 months pregnant with a child that would change everything. She didn't know it yet, but that pregnancy had already sealed her fate. Curtis Shearer sat in his study down the hall, door closed, speaking in low tones with their daughter Madison. Debbie had noticed the closed-door meetings increasing over the past few weeks, the hushed phone calls, the way they both went silent when she entered a room. She told herself it was paranoia, that pregnancy hormones were making her imagine things, but instinct whispered otherwise. She prepared breakfast as she did every morning, setting out fresh fruit, artisan bread, imported cheeses, everything perfect, everything exactly as Curtis preferred. She'd learned early in their marriage that Curtis Shearer demanded perfection in all things: his business deals, his public image, his home life. Debbie had spent years molding herself into the perfect wife, the kind of woman who looked flawless at charity galas and never asked inconvenient questions. Madison emerged first, her designer heels clicking against Italian tile. 28 years old, sharp-featured, with her father's calculating eyes and ruthless ambition, she'd built her identity around being Curtis Shearer's heir, the future of the family empire. She glanced at Debbie's pregnant belly with something Debbie couldn't quite identify. Disgust? Fear? Hatred? Mourning? Debbie offered, her voice bright despite the knot forming in her stomach. Madison poured herself coffee without responding. She scrolled through her phone, fingers moving with aggressive precision, completely ignoring Debbie's existence. Curtis entered next, already dressed in a tailored suit despite the early hour. He had meetings in the city, always meetings, always deals to close and empires to expand. He'd built his fortune from nothing, clawed his way up from poverty to become one of the wealthiest men in the country. That journey had hardened something in him, turned compassion into calculation. Curtis, Debbie tried again, forcing cheerfulness into her tone. I was thinking we could talk about the nursery plans today. I found some beautiful. He walked past her as if she hadn't spoken, sat down at the table, opened his newspaper. The silence pressed against Debbie's chest like a physical weight, making it difficult to breathe. She stood there, frozen, one hand still on her belly, the other gripping the counter for support. This wasn't new. The coldness had been growing for weeks now, ever since she'd told them about the pregnancy. But this morning felt different, more final, more deliberate. Please, she whispered, hating the desperation in her voice. Just tell me what's wrong. Whatever I did, I can fix it. Madison stood abruptly, leaving her coffee half-finished, and walked out without a backward glance. Curtis folded his newspaper with methodical precision, rose from his chair, and followed his daughter into his study. The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot in the cavernous kitchen. Debbie stood alone among the breakfast she'd prepared, surrounded by luxury that meant nothing, in a house that had become a beautiful prison. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window above the sink, a woman who didn't yet know she was already gone. Curtis sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin, watching Madison pace the length of his study. 3 weeks had passed since that morning in the kitchen. 3 weeks of calculated silence, designed to break Debbie's spirit completely. She's not leaving on her own, Madison said, her voice tight with frustration. "I thought the isolation would be enough, but she's still here, still trying." Curtis allowed himself a thin smile. "Then we stop waiting for her to leave. We make the decision for her." Madison stopped pacing, turned to face her father. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and in that silence, an understanding passed between them. The kind of understanding that only exists between people willing to cross lines others wouldn't dare approach. "The car," Curtis said simply. "Tonight." The plan formed quickly, efficiently, the way Curtis handled all his business dealings. Debbie's silver sedan would go off the mountain road on Highway 47, the dangerous stretch where 3 other vehicles had met similar fates in the past 5 years. Tragic but believable. The kind of accident that would generate sympathy instead of suspicion. They didn't discuss the pregnancy, didn't mention the life growing inside Debbie that would disappear along with her. Some things were too dark to speak aloud, even for them. That evening, Debbie prepared dinner with shaking hands. She'd felt the shift in the house, sensed something terrible building like storm clouds on the horizon. When Curtis finally spoke to her for the first time in weeks, his voice was almost gentle. "We need to talk," he said, standing in the kitchen doorway. "Take a drive with me. Clear the air." Hope flared in Debbie's chest, desperate and painful. Maybe this nightmare was ending. Maybe they could finally talk about whatever had gone so horribly wrong. "Really?" Her voice cracked. "You want to talk? Get your coat," Curtis replied, already turning away. "We'll take your car." Debbie grabbed her jacket with trembling fingers, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear she couldn't quite name. Madison watched from the stairs, her expression unreadable in the dim light. In the car, Curtis drove while Debbie sat in the passenger seat, one hand protectively over her belly. The silence stretched between them as they climbed the winding mountain road, headlights cutting through gathering darkness. "Curtis." "Please," Debbie began. "Whatever I did, I'm sorry. I just want us to be a family again. The baby deserves." "Stop." His voice was ice. "Just stop talking." The car accelerated. Debbie's stomach dropped as she realized they were approaching the dangerous curves, the ones with the steep drop-off where the guardrails had never been properly maintained. "Curtis, slow down. You're scaring me." He didn't slow down. His jaw was set, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. But at the last second, something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt, but close enough. He pulled over abruptly at an overlook, tires skidding on gravel. "Get out," he said. "What?" "Get out of the car, Debbie. Now." She stumbled out, confused and terrified. Curtis got out too, moved around to the driver's side of her car. When she understood what he was doing, her blood turned to ice. "Curtis, no. Please, God, no. You were never here," he said, his voice flat. "You left. Ran away. Abandoned your family. That's the story. But the baby." Tears streamed down her face. "Please, think about the baby." Something in his expression hardened. "I am thinking about my legacy. Madison is my heir. This complication ends tonight." He didn't push the car off the cliff. Instead, he made a phone call. 20 minutes later, 2 men arrived in a dark van. Debbie screamed, fought, begged, but Curtis had already turned away, already climbing into the vehicle that would take him back to his empire, back to his life without her. The last thing Debbie saw before everything went black was Curtis's retreating figure, shoulders squared, never looking back. The news broke 3 days later. Debbie Shearer, beloved wife and expectant mother, had died in a tragic single-car accident on Highway 47. Her vehicle had been found at the bottom of a ravine, wreckage so complete that identification took time. The medical examiner's report cited brake failure and excessive speed. Curtis stood at the memorial service in a black suit, accepting condolences with appropriate solemnity. Madison stood beside him, tears streaming down her face that might have been real or performance. No one could tell the difference. The community mourned. Business associates sent flowers. Local papers ran touching obituaries about a woman taken too soon, a child who would never be born. Curtis returned to his empire, to board meetings and acquisition deals. Madison stepped fully into her role as sole heir, her position secured, her future guaranteed. At night, sometimes, Curtis woke in darkness with the phantom sound of Debbie's screams echoing in his ears, but he pushed the guilt down deep, buried it beneath spreadsheets and profit margins and the relentless forward momentum of a man who refused to look back. He'd won. The threat was eliminated. Everything could continue exactly as planned. He had no way of knowing that 5 years later, the ghost he'd created would walk through a door and destroy everything he'd built. 5 years passed like pages in a ledger. Curtis Shearer's empire doubled, then tripled. His name appeared in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. He acquired companies the way other men collected watches, each acquisition another testament to his ruthless brilliance. Debbie became a ghost story he stopped thinking about. The guilt that once woke him at night faded into background noise, then silence. He convinced himself it had been necessary. A business decision, nothing more. Madison flourished in her role as sole heir. She graduated from Harvard Business School with honors, took a vice president position at Shearer Enterprises, and became known in business circles as her father's protégé. Sharp, ambitious, unburdened by sentiment. When she announced her engagement to Preston Caldwell, heir to a hotel fortune, Curtis felt something close to satisfaction. The wedding would unite two powerful families, create new opportunities for expansion, everything falling perfectly into place. The estate transformed into a fairy tale venue. White roses cascaded from every surface. Crystal chandeliers hung in the garden pavilion where 300 guests would witness Madison's triumph. No expense spared, no detail overlooked. Curtis oversaw it all with the same meticulous attention he brought to billion-dollar deals. 3 days before the wedding, Curtis sat in his study, reviewing the guest list when his assistant knocked hesitantly. "Sir, this just arrived, hand-delivered." The courier said it was urgent. The envelope was plain white, no return address. Curtis opened it with barely a thought, expecting some last-minute vendor confirmation or client congratulations. The handwriting made his blood freeze. "Dear Curtis, 5 years is a long time to be dead, don't you think? I've thought about this moment every single day since you erased me. Every morning when I woke up in that facility where your men left me. Every night when I held the son you never knew existed. Every time I looked at his face and saw your eyes staring back at me. You thought you buried me on Highway 47. You didn't. You just gave me time to plan. I'll be attending Madison's wedding. Our son is excited to meet his father and sister. He's 4 now, beautiful and smart. He has your stubborn chin, and my determination. I've named him after you, Curtis. Curtis Jr. I thought you'd appreciate the irony. See you Saturday. Always yours, Debbie." The letter slipped from Curtis's fingers. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat echoing in his ears like thunder. The room tilted, walls closing in. Impossible. He'd seen the accident report, the burned wreckage, the medical examiner's confirmation. Debbie Stump Shearer, deceased, case closed. But that handwriting, he'd recognize it anywhere. The careful loops, the slight slant to the right. Debbie's hand, undeniably. Curtis grabbed his phone with shaking fingers, dialed the number he'd sworn never to use again. The man who'd handled the arrangement 5 years ago. "We have a problem," Curtis said when the voice answered. "She's alive." Silence on the other end. Then, "That's not possible. She sent me a letter. She knows about the wedding. She's coming. I'll handle it." "No," Curtis's voice cracked. "No more handling. Just find out how she survived, where she's been, what she wants." He hung up, stared at the letter on his desk. A son. She claimed to have a son. His son. The door opened. Madison walked in, radiant in her pre-wedding glow, holding fabric swatches. "Daddy, I need you to decide between ivory and champagne for the..." She stopped. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Curtis forced his expression neutral, years of boardroom poker faces snapping into place. He slid the letter into his desk drawer. "Nothing. Just a minor business complication. 3 days before my wedding?" Madison's eyes narrowed. "What kind of complication?" "Nothing that can't be managed." The lie tasted bitter. "Show me the fabrics." But as Madison spread swatches across his desk, chattering about centerpieces and seating arrangements, Curtis's mind raced. Debbie was alive. She had a child. She was coming. Saturday would be Madison's perfect day, the culmination of 5 years of careful planning. Nothing could disrupt it. Nothing would disrupt it. He still had power, resources, control. He would find Debbie before Saturday. Offer her money, as much as she wanted. Threaten her if necessary. Make her disappear again. Properly this time. Curtis Shearer hadn't built an empire by letting ghosts from his past destroy his future. He would handle this. He always did. But deep in his chest, beneath the confidence and calculated control, fear bloomed like poison. Because the letter had ended with 4 words that chilled him more than any threat. Always yours, Debbie. Not angry. Not vengeful. Certain. The garden pavilion glowed like something from a dream. 300 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits sipped champagne beneath cascading white roses. String quartet music floated through the air. Madison stood near the altar in ivory silk, radiant and untouchable, while Preston held her hand and smiled at the assembled crowd. Curtis stood off to the side, his tuxedo crisp, his expression carefully neutral. But inside, his heart hammered against his ribs. Security had swept the grounds twice. No sign of Debbie. Maybe the letter had been a cruel prank. Maybe she'd reconsidered. Maybe. The crowd's murmur shifted. Heads turned toward the entrance. Curtis felt the change before he saw it. Like the temperature dropping before a storm. His legs locked. His breath caught in his throat. She stood in the archway, backlit by afternoon sun. Debbie. Alive. Real. Undeniable. She wore a simple navy dress. Nothing expensive or flashy. Her hair was shorter, her frame leaner, but her face was unmistakable, and in her arms, holding her hand with complete trust, stood a small boy with dark curls and Curtis's exact jawline. Time fractured. The world tilted sideways. Curtis's vision tunneled. Blood roared in his ears. His knees buckled slightly, and he grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible, but she was walking toward him now. The child's small hand clutched in hers. Her eyes locked on Curtis with an intensity that burned through every defense he'd built. Madison saw her next. Curtis watched his daughter's face drain of color, watched recognition flicker across her features followed by pure, undiluted horror. Mom? The word fell from Madison's lips like a stone into still water. The guests erupted into confused whispers. Preston looked between Madison and the approaching woman, clearly lost. The string quartet faltered, notes dying mid-phrase. Debbie stopped 10 feet from Curtis. The little boy looked up at her, uncertain, then back at the strange man whose face had gone white as death. "Hello, Curtis," Debbie said. Her voice was steady, calm, nothing like the desperate, pleading woman he'd erased 5 years ago. "I hope we're not interrupting. We wouldn't miss Madison's special day." Curtis's mouth opened. No sound came out. His carefully cultivated control, the iron composure that had built empires and crushed competitors, shattered like glass. "This is your son," Debbie continued, her hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. "Curtis Jr. He's been excited to meet his father. I've told him so much about you." The child stared at Curtis with wide eyes. Curious, innocent, unaware of the apocalypse his existence represented. Madison stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "You're dead. We buried you." "The accident?" "There was no accident," Debbie said, her gaze shifting to her daughter. Her voice carried across the silent pavilion, every guest straining to hear. "Your father had me taken, drugged, left in a psychiatric facility, under a false name. All because I was pregnant and he decided his heir shouldn't have to share." The words landed like bombs. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Camera phones appeared, people filming, documenting the implosion of the Shearer family in real time. Curtis finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. "Debbie, please. Not here. We can talk privately. I'll give you whatever you want. Money, property, anything. I don't want your money." Debbie's eyes blazed. "I want the truth to be known. I want everyone here to see what you really are. What you did to me. To your own child." Madison collapsed into Preston's arms, sobbing. The guilt she'd buried for 5 years erupted like a volcano. "I helped him," she choked out. "Oh God. I helped him do it. I thought I believed." Her voice broke completely. Curtis reached for Madison, his hand shaking violently. "Sweetheart, no. You didn't know. I protected you from what?" Debbie's voice cut like a blade. From the truth? You made her complicit in attempted murder, Curtis. You turned your daughter into an accomplice. Security moved toward them, but Curtis waved them off with a jerky motion. His facade was crumbling, cracks spreading across his composure like ice breaking under pressure. Please, he whispered, and the word held 5 years of suppressed guilt. Not like this. Exactly like this, Debbie said. She looked at the assembled guests, at the phones recording everything, at the daughter who'd helped erase her. You wanted a perfect wedding? Here it is. The truth dressed up in white roses. Curtis's legs gave out. He grabbed for the chair again, missed, and fell to his knees on the perfect white carpet. The most powerful man in the room, reduced to nothing by the ghost he'd created. The boy looked at his mother, confused by the chaos. Mama? Why is everyone crying? Because sometimes, Debbie said gently, the truth hurts more than lies ever could. The wedding guests stood frozen, champagne glasses forgotten, phones still recording. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Madison's broken sobs and the distant hum of traffic beyond the estate walls. Debbie looked at the crowd, then back at Curtis, still kneeling on the white carpet. Her son pressed closer to her side, sensing the tension even if he didn't understand it. You want to know where I've been for 5 years? Debbie's voice carried across the pavilion, clear and unwavering. Let me paint you a picture of what happens when a billionaire decides his pregnant wife is inconvenient. Curtis tried to stand, his legs shaking. Debbie, please, think about what you're doing. Think about the boy. I have thought about him. Every single day. Her eyes blazed. I thought about him when I woke up in that facility, with no memory of how I got there. When the nurses called me by a name that wasn't mine. When they told me I'd tried to hurt myself, that I was mentally unstable, that nobody was coming for me. Madison's head snapped up, mascara streaming down her face. What facility? Riverside Psychiatric Hospital. 300 miles from here, registered under the name Jane Morrison. Debbie's voice didn't waver. Your father's men drugged me that night on the mountain. When I woke up, I was strapped to a bed, pregnant and alone, with doctors who believed I was someone else entirely. The crowd gasped. Several guests looked at Curtis with undisguised horror. That's not... Curtis started, but his voice failed him. Not what? Debbie cut him off. Not true? I have medical records, Curtis. Intake forms. Security footage. 5 years' worth of documentation proving exactly where I was and how I got there. She reached into her purse with her free hand, pulled out a thick envelope, and held it up. Everything is here. The false identity you created, the payments made to keep me there, the instructions that I was never to be released without your explicit approval. Curtis's face went gray. Around them, guests whispered frantically to each other. Several people were already backing away, distancing themselves from the scandal. Preston stood behind Madison, his arm around her shoulders, looking completely lost. Madison pushed away from him, stumbled toward her mother on unsteady legs. How did you? Her voice cracked. How did you get out? Debbie's expression softened slightly when she looked at her daughter. I gave birth to your brother in that facility. They let me hold him for 10 minutes before they tried to take him away for adoption. That's when I knew I had to fight. She paused, her hand tightening protectively on the boy's shoulder. It took me 6 months to convince a social worker that something was wrong. Another year to get a lawyer who believed me. By the time they verified my real identity and released me, Curtis Jr. was almost 2 years old. Why didn't you come forward immediately? Someone in the crowd called out. Because I was terrified, Debbie said simply. Curtis Shearer is one of the most powerful men in this country. He'd already erased me once. Who would believe me over him? So I disappeared. Changed my name legally. Moved 3 states away. Got a job as a waitress and raised my son in a 1-bedroom apartment. She looked directly at Curtis, who seemed to be shrinking under her gaze. But I also gathered evidence. Every document I could find. Testimony from the social worker who helped me. Medical records proving my real identity. A paper trail of Curtis's payments to the facility. I built a case, piece by piece, year by year. Madison sank to her knees beside her father, her wedding dress pooling around her like a deflated cloud. I helped him, she whispered. God forgive me. I helped him do this to you. You were manipulated, Debbie said. though her voice held steel beneath the sympathy. But you still made a choice. You chose the inheritance over your mother's life. I thought you were a problem. Madison sobbed. Daddy said you were trying to take everything from me. That the baby would complicate our legacy. I believed him. I trusted him. She turned to Curtis, her face contorted with anguish and rage. You made me an accomplice to attempted murder. You turned me into a monster like you. Curtis reached for her, but Madison recoiled violently. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again. The boy tugged on Debbie's hand. Mama, I'm scared. Debbie knelt down, pulling him close. I know, baby. We're almost done. She stood again, addressing the crowd one final time. Tomorrow, I'm filing charges. Criminal charges for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and attempted murder. Civil charges for everything else. Every news outlet in the country will have this story by evening. Curtis finally found his voice, hoarse and desperate. I'll fight you. I have resources, lawyers, power, and I have the truth, Debbie said quietly. We'll see which one wins. She took her son's hand and turned to leave. As she walked past Madison, still kneeling in her ruined wedding dress, she paused. I loved you, Debbie said softly. I hope someday you'll understand what that means. Then she was gone, walking out of the pavilion with her son, leaving behind the shattered remains of Curtis Shearer's perfect empire. The pavilion emptied slowly, guests fleeing the scandal like rats from a sinking ship. Phones buzzed with frantic calls to publicists and lawyers. Society pages would run this story for months. The Shearer name, once synonymous with power and success, would now mean only one thing: attempted murder, disguised as business. Curtis remained on his knees, staring at the spot where Debbie had stood. His mind couldn't process what had just happened. 5 years of careful construction, of building his empire higher and higher, obliterated in 15 minutes. Sir. His head of security approached cautiously. We should get you inside. The press will be here soon. Curtis didn't move. Couldn't move. His body felt disconnected from his brain, limbs heavy and unresponsive. The panic attack hit like a freight train, chest tightening until each breath became a battle. I can't breathe, he gasped, clawing at his collar. I can't. Security called for medical assistance. Madison watched from 10 feet away, still in her ruined wedding dress. Tears dried on her face. She made no move to help him. Preston touched her arm gently. Madison, we should leave, she said flatly. Just leave, Preston. There's not going to be a wedding. I know. But there's never going to be a wedding. Her voice cracked. How can I marry you when I'm complicit in attempted murder? How can I marry anyone? Preston hesitated, clearly torn between duty and self-preservation. Self-preservation won. He kissed her forehead awkwardly and walked away, joining the exodus of guests who wanted no part of the Shearer family disaster. Paramedics arrived, checking Curtis's vitals while he gasped for air. His blood pressure was dangerously high. They recommended immediate hospitalization. No, Curtis managed. No hospitals. Just get me inside. They helped him to his feet, half carrying him toward the house. Madison followed at a distance, her expensive heels clicking on the stone pathway. The sound echoed in the emptying garden like gunshots. Inside his study, Curtis collapsed into his leather chair, the same chair where he'd planned Debbie's erasure 5 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. This room had been his command center, the place where he'd made billion-dollar decisions and crushed competitors without mercy. Now it felt like a tomb. Madison stood in the doorway, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Disgust? Hatred? Grief? Say something, Curtis rasped. What do you want me to say? Her voice was hollow. That I forgive you. That we'll get through this together. I protected you, he said desperately. Everything I did was to protect your future. You made me an accomplice to attempted murder. Madison's composure finally shattered. You turned me into a monster, and I didn't even know it. I thought I was protecting our legacy. I thought Mom was a threat. She was a threat. She was pregnant, Madison screamed. She was carrying your child, my brother. And you had her committed under a false name. You stole 5 years of her life. 5 years of his life. Curtis's hands shook violently. He tried to pour himself whiskey, but the bottle slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. The smell of expensive liquor filled the room. "I can fix this," he whispered. "I always fix things. You can't fix this." Madison's laugh was bitter. "By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the country will have the story. Your business partners will distance themselves. Your board will demand your resignation. Everything you built will crumble. Then we'll rebuild. We're shearers. There is no we anymore." Madison pulled off her engagement ring, set it on his desk. "I'm done. With you. With this family. With everything. Madison, please. I helped you erase my mother. Do you understand what that means? I have to live with that for the rest of my life." Tears streamed down her face again. And for what? Money, an inheritance built on lies and cruelty. She turned to leave. "Where will you go?" Curtis's voice broke completely. "I don't know," Madison said without looking back. "Anywhere you're not." The door closed softly behind her. Curtis sat alone in his study, surrounded by the trappings of success that meant nothing anymore. Awards lined the walls, photos of himself with presidents and CEOs, proof of his empire, all of it worthless. His phone buzzed incessantly. Board members, lawyers, investors. He ignored them all. What could he possibly say? How could he explain the inexplicable? Outside, car engines started as the last guests departed. Soon the estate would be empty, except for Curtis and his guilt. He'd collapsed before, in the pavilion, his body giving out under the weight of confrontation. But this collapse was deeper, more complete. His empire was falling. His daughter was gone. His carefully constructed life was disintegrating like sand through his fingers. And somewhere out there, Debbie was preparing to destroy whatever remained. Curtis Shearer, the man who'd built billions from nothing, had finally learned a truth he'd spent his life denying. Some things, once broken, can never be fixed. 3 hours passed in silence. Curtis remained in his study, staring at nothing. Madison sat alone in her childhood bedroom, still wearing the wedding dress that now felt like a costume from someone else's life. The house staff had fled, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Even the caterers abandoned their stations, leaving behind tables of untouched food and champagne that would never be drunk. Madison finally stood, her legs stiff from sitting motionless for so long. She walked down the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last, until she reached her father's study. The door was ajar. She pushed it open. Curtis looked up, and for the first time in her life, Madison saw him as he truly was. Not a titan of industry, not an untouchable billionaire, but a broken old man who'd destroyed everything he claimed to love. "I need to understand," Madison said, her voice raw from crying. "I need you to explain to me how you convinced me to help you erase my own mother." Curtis's hands trembled as he reached for the empty glass on his desk. "I was protecting you. Stop saying that." Madison's composure shattered. "Stop hiding behind that excuse. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself, your control, your empire." "The baby would have complicated everything," Curtis said weakly. "Your inheritance, the company structure, the succession plan. She was pregnant with my brother." Madison's voice broke. "A human being. Your son. And you treated him like a line item on a balance sheet that needed to be eliminated." Curtis couldn't meet her eyes. "You agreed. You helped. Because you manipulated me," Madison screamed. "I was 23 years old, desperate to please you, terrified of losing my place as your heir. You fed me lies about Mom trying to take everything from us. You made me believe she was the enemy. She was in the way. She was my mother." Madison sank into the chair across from him, her wedding dress pooling around her like a shroud. "And I helped you destroy her because I was too blinded by money and your approval to see what was really happening." Silence filled the space between them. Outside, night had fallen completely. The estate's security lights cast harsh shadows through the windows. "I remember the night you told me the plan," Madison said quietly. "You called me into this office, sat me down in this exact chair. You said Mom's pregnancy was a threat to everything we'd built together, that she'd always been weak, unstable, that she'd eventually turn on us." She looked at her father with tears streaming down her face. "And I believed you. God help me. I believed every word. I even suggested using Highway 47 because I knew about the accidents there. I helped you plan the timing, the story we'd tell people. I was an accomplice in every sense of the word. Madison, I stood at her memorial service. Madison continued, her voice rising. I cried fake tears over a coffin that didn't even hold her body. I accepted condolences from people who thought my mother was dead. And the whole time, she was locked in a psychiatric facility, pregnant and alone, believing she'd lost everything. Curtis finally looked at her, his face gray and haggard. I thought I was building something for you. A legacy, an empire. You built it on my mother's suffering, Madison said flatly. Every dollar, every acquisition, every success in the past 5 years is stained with what we did to her. She stood, smoothing down her dress with shaking hands. I've spent 5 years as your protege, learning how to be ruthless in business, how to make hard decisions, how to put profit over people. You taught me well, Daddy. I became exactly what you wanted. Where are you going? Curtis asked, panic creeping into his voice. Away from you, away from this house, away from everything this family represents. Madison walked toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow, I'm calling Debbie's lawyer. I'm going to testify against you. I'm going to tell them everything I know about what we did. Curtis stood abruptly. Madison, you can't. You'll incriminate yourself. You could face charges. Good, Madison said simply. I deserve them. We both do. But the company, your future, everything I built for you, is worthless. Madison turned to face him one last time. You know what Mom said to me before she left? She said she loved me. After everything we did to her, she still loved me enough to hope I'd understand someday. Tears rolled down her cheeks. That's more than you ever gave anyone. You only know how to take, to control, to destroy. And I'm done being your accomplice. Please, Curtis whispered. Don't leave me alone. Madison looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw the truth. He'd always been alone. His empire was built on isolation, his success on the ruins of human connection. You did this to yourself, she said. You erased the one person who truly loved you, and you turned your daughter into a monster. This is your reckoning, not mine. I'm just choosing to face it honestly. She walked out, closing the door softly behind her. Curtis collapsed back into his chair, surrounded by awards and accolades that meant nothing. His empire was crumbling. His daughter was gone. His family was destroyed, and there was no one left to blame but himself. The story broke at dawn. By sunrise, every major news outlet carried the headline, Billionaire Curtis Shearer accused of imprisoning pregnant wife under false identity. Video footage from the wedding went viral within hours. Curtis on his knees, Debbie holding her son, Madison collapsing in her wedding dress. 300 witnesses with 300 phones capturing every moment of the Shearer family's destruction. Curtis watched the news coverage from his study, unable to look away from his own downfall playing on loop. Financial networks ran analyses of Shearer Enterprises' stock price plummeting 40% in pre-market trading. Legal experts debated the criminal charges Debbie would likely file. Former business associates issued carefully worded statements distancing themselves from the scandal. His phone rang constantly, board members demanding his immediate resignation, investors threatening lawsuits, lawyers offering representation he couldn't afford to refuse. He answered none of them. At 10 o'clock, his head of security entered without knocking. Sir, there's a process server at the gate. Criminal charges. They're being filed within the hour. Curtis nodded numbly. Of course they were. Debbie had promised as much. There's also a mob of reporters. They're requesting a statement. Tell them to leave. They won't, sir. Not until they get something. Curtis looked at the man who'd worked for him for 15 years, who'd helped orchestrate Debbie's disappearance, who now stood in the doorway with resignation already written across his face. You're leaving too, Curtis said flatly. Yes, sir. I've been subpoenaed. My lawyer advised me to cooperate with investigators. He paused. I'm sorry, but he wasn't. Nobody was sorry. They were all just rats, fleeing the sinking ship Curtis had built with lies and cruelty. By noon, the board voted unanimously to remove Curtis as CEO and chairman. His face was scrubbed from the company website within minutes. Press releases announced a complete leadership overhaul and cooperation with all ongoing investigations. By 3 o'clock, 3 separate law firms had filed class action lawsuits on behalf of shareholders. By evening, the district attorney held a press conference announcing charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy, and fraud. Curtis sat in his study, watching his empire disintegrate in real time. Every channel showed the same story. Every website carried the same headlines. The Shearer name, once synonymous with success, now meant only one thing: monster. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He almost didn't open it. "We're leaving tomorrow. Starting over somewhere you'll never find us. I wanted you to know. I won. Not because I destroyed you, but because I survived you. That little boy you tried to erase, he's brilliant and kind and nothing like you. He'll never know what you tried to do to us. That's my final gift to you. Curtis, your son will grow up free from your poison. Goodbye." Curtis stared at the message until the screen went dark. Debbie was leaving, taking their son somewhere beyond his reach, reclaiming the life he'd stolen, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. Outside, night fell over the estate. Security lights flickered on, illuminating grounds that felt more like a prison than a palace. Madison was gone, staying in a hotel downtown, preparing to testify against him. The staff had abandoned their posts. The house stood empty, except for Curtis and his ghosts. He walked through rooms filled with expensive art and designer furniture, past photos of himself with presidents and celebrities, through hallways lined with awards and accolades. All of it meaningless, all of it purchased with blood. In Madison's room, her wedding dress still lay crumpled on the floor where she'd left it. The engagement ring sat on her dresser, abandoned. 5 years of planning for a wedding that would never happen, for a future that would never exist. Curtis returned to his study one final time. Tomorrow, federal agents would arrive with handcuffs and indictments. Tomorrow, his lawyers would begin the impossible task of defending the indefensible. Tomorrow, the full weight of justice would begin crushing what remained of his life. But tonight, he sat alone in the empire he'd built, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd destroyed. His wife, who'd loved him once, was free. His daughter, who'd worshipped him once, had turned against him. His son, who'd never known him, would grow up believing his father was dead. Curtis Shearer had spent his life accumulating power, building an empire on ruthlessness and control. He'd believed himself untouchable, invincible, above consequences. He'd been wrong about everything. The terror he'd felt when Debbie walked through that door was nothing compared to the horror of understanding what he'd become. A man who'd destroyed his own family for money, a father who'd erased his own child, a husband who'd buried his wife alive. He'd built an empire on lies. Now he would die alone in its ruins. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought, and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.